So let's begin with the word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are so thankful for the time that we have here this morning to once again open your word and look at Adventist history and the foundation of this message. Lord, we ask that this week you can help us as we struggle through a new understanding for many of us, me included, of the Millerite understanding of these statements here in early writings and the related aspects of the daily in the time periods that are presented in Millerite writings. And Lord, we know that there's many things that we don't fully understand and that we need to have clarified. Help us to have open mind and hearts. And please be with each one through thy Spirit to instruct us. Lord, we pray for each person and for this movement, for the struggles that we face and the trials that are ahead. Help us to be faithful to thy word and to encourage and support one another. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. So good morning, everyone. And so this week, we're going to be going through trying to understand how Miller's understanding of the 666 years and its relationship to the daily, and the 1335 and its relationship to the daily, how this has been distorted by Adventist history, which I didn't realize how much it had been distorted, and why it's on the 1850 chart, and how that's related to the statement in early writings, page 74 and 75. So there's lots of things that we're going to have to sort through. And it's taken me quite a bit of time to sort through this just on my own. And so, I mean, the work that I've done will help us a little bit, but we really do need to struggle through this together. Now, we're going to start here. Now, this is Heidi Hikes misrepresenting the problem, as we've seen that he likes to do, and to confuse us and to undermine what was actually taught. And most people are just going to pass by this and accept it. And we saw that with Dennis Kaiser in his paper dealing with Ellen G. White in the Daily. And I think that this is, for anybody who has ever looked at this problem, I don't know if I know anyone who really understands Miller's view. That is, I've talked to lots of people and discussed it, and I don't think I understood it. And I think I was defending something that I only partly understood. And part of that was the way that this has been represented or misrepresented by more recent writers. Now, he talks here, he says, Brother Miller advocated the 10 horned beast from the sea in Revelation 13 was pagan Rome. So what he's jumping to here is he's looking at the chart in a sense, though he's not directly addressing the chart. And so he's going to talk about this. The beast from the sea is, of course, the one that what we would call the composite beast, and that's going to be. Now it says here, he says it was pagan Rome. Now, is this correct? Did Brother Miller teach that the 10 horned beast from the sea was pagan Rome? In Revelation 13.
I don't believe so.
No, they did not. They taught that the great red dragon in Revelation 12 was pagan Rome. Now, why he's making this error, I'm not sure. But he says, but we all know that to be false. Ellen White clearly says that the first beast of Revelation 13 is none other than the papacy. Now, so he makes this statement, but he's not going to give us a reference where we can find this. And I can't find it. I can't find Brother Miller teaching that the 10 horned beast from the sea is pagan Rome. When you look on the 1843 chart, they have this 10 horned beast represented as papal Rome. So I think it's highly unlikely that what ended up on the 1843 chart was different than what Miller taught. So it's quite, to me, these are quite amazing little details that, well, whether he puts this here intentionally to misrepresent Miller, or whether it's just his lack of understanding himself of what it is that he's attacking, I don't know. But it definitely is going to lend to confusion for anybody who actually is going to look at this. They're automatically going to be biased against Miller. They're going to see all these supposed errors of Miller. Okay. But everything that I understand is that the dragon power from Revelation 12 is pagan Rome. And he gives to this beast, papal Rome, his power, seat, and great authority. So that's Revelation 13, verse 2. Yes, somebody has a comment?
As a question,
Okay.
do you know approximately when Hikes first had this daily source book published? I mean, according to the title page, it was 2008, but I thought it was published much before that.
No, I think it was 2008.
Okay, so would Hikes then be relying more on Froome's work?
Well, this was what I had heard when I first heard of Heidi Hikes. And I think it was Dwayne Dewey who suggested that Hikes didn't actually write this book, that it was actually Froome's research that Hikes just put into a document. Now, I don't know how he would have known that, other than you can see he's dependent upon Froome for a lot of his ideas. But that wouldn't say that he took a document written by Froome and then just attached his name to it, which was sort of the accusation that I remember was being made. And I think the first I heard of it was in 2014 when I was in Arkansas. And it might have been 2012 even, when Dwayne Dewey was doing the Desolations of Jerusalem. But definitely by 2014, I'd heard about it. And this seemed to be a recent book. Like, you know, it wasn't like some old book. It was a recent book. But so I'm pretty sure the 2008 is the original writing of it, and that he's updated it a little bit here and there. But this is an obvious error on his part. So I'm not sure. So he says, Miller also taught that the two horned beast from the earth in Revelation 13 was the papal image of paganism. So the papacy, we know this also to be false. For Ellen White says the two horned beast is none other than the United States of America. Now, on the 1843 chart, they don't have the two horned beast. So we can't just look to the chart there to decide what he thought. Now, but he's still misrepresenting kind of what Miller taught. For sure, Miller did not fully understand the image of the beast. So, and I'm not sure whether there's a dash in paganism there either. So that must be just from copying it from something that had a dash in it and he didn't edit it, which is kind of sloppy for something that's published as a book. But anyway, but the papal image of paganism, in some ways, that view is not false, right? Because the image of the beast is an image of the papacy.
Agreed.
Yeah. So Miller may not have understood fully what it meant, but you can't really argue that he's completely wrong there. even if that's the position that he takes. Now, just to kind of address this a little bit, we have Jan Andrews' work, which we're going to look at. So Dwight had brought up an article by Jan Andrews that is quite good, but in addressing some of these points. But I want to just look and see if I can find here quickly any comments by Miller regarding this two-horned beast. So I'm just going to do a quick search. Okay, so it talks here, this is from Evidences of Scripture and History on the Second Coming of Christ about the year 1843 and his personal reign of 1,000 years. So I'm going to just share this, what I'm looking at here. So this is just on the E.G. White disc. He says, I'm just looking ahead here. Where is he? We will now explain the second vision of the same chapter, which is a view of the anti-Christian beast in his same ecclesiastical form, beginning at the 11th verse. And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb and spake as a dragon, or spoke as a dragon. The prophet saw papacy arise out of the Roman government, having or pretending to have two ruling powers of Christ's church. That is, the bishops and deacons, commanding with all the authority of imperial Rome or pagan Rome. And he exerciseth all the power of the first beast or pagan Rome before him, and causeth the earth or Roman kingdom and them that dwell therein to worship the first beast or Rome pagan, whose deadly wound was healed. So it does seem here that he is talking about the first beast being pagan Rome. So maybe Hykes is correct in this part, at least in his early understanding of these things. But since the 1843 charts does not have the first beast as pagan Rome, I still think it's a misrepresentation of the issue. So he may be just referring to this passage here. And this is definitely early Miller. And probably we should read all of this here. He's going to go into 666 as well, but we're just going to kind of skip some of this. Okay, so he's going to say here, maybe I'll make this a little bit bigger.
Okay, but this is, of course, interesting, since this is in what you're initially reading was part of what Sylvester Bliss had written regarding Miller, right?
Well, this is Miller's book, Evidences from Scripture and History of the Second Coming of Christ about the year 1843.
All right.
So in Sylvester Bliss's book, when I typed up Lamb Like Beast, it didn't give any hits. So it jumped to Miller's works right away. So I didn't have to look at anything in Bliss. So he says, thus from the considerations mentioned, I've come to the conclusion that the beast called pagan Rome began when Rome became connected with the Jews by league 158 years BC and lasted until 508 years after Christ, making in all 666 years. Then by adding Daniel's 1335 years, bringing us down to 1843. Now, so we have this period of 666 years, which we're going to have to address and specifically understand what this issue is regarding it and how it's addressed on the 1850 chart. And what Ellen White is addressing when she's talking about the daily, because this is connected to the daily. because we know the daily is taken away in 508. And the suggestion by some of these writers is that Miller saw that the daily was pagan Rome only, that he didn't consider it to be, Babylon, Media, Persia, and Greece, which of course is not the case because we can show other places. Now, Miller's understanding would have developed over time as they continued to study, but this was something that is on the 1850 chart. But in a way, and it's also on the 1843 chart, even though many people argue that it isn't, that they say the 666 years is not on the 1843 chart. But we have the date 158 BC on the 1843 chart, and we have the date 508 AD on the 1843 chart. And that, and the information given there is the information that was the basis for him marking the 666 years. That the number 666 doesn't occur on the 1843 chart does not mean that Miller's idea is not on the 1843 chart. So let's look at it another way. I'm going to go to my paper that I've been working on and address this point here. So I'm just going to have to switch over here. So I'm going to deal with what Heidi Hike says in my paper. So I'm going to share this. Okay. So I'm addressing this statement regarding the daily. And I don't know if this is the best way to do it here right now in the study, but this is just, to me, the most convenient to try to go back and address this statement in early writings, how I did it at the time that I wrote the paper. And my understanding is still growing on this issue. So if we are to take the plain reading of the passage, so this is the passage in early writings. Then I saw the daily, and the Lord gave the correct view of it to those who gave the first angel's message. When union existed before 1844, nearly all were united on the correct view of the daily. But since, in the confusion, other views have been embraced and darkness has followed. I saw that God had not made a test of time since 1844, and that time will never again be a test. Now, this statement, as you see here, is not the statement that you find in early writings. This is the statement from the original writing of the vision, or what I believe to be the original account that is in manuscript 15. Now, one of the things you'll see is that it says, I saw God had not made a test of time since 1844, where there isn't these I saw statement. It's not placed in front of the word time has not been a test since 1844 will never again be a test. And there's other information that's added in early writings. So I don't want to go through the whole detail of that now, but I'm just going to address that we have here the correct view of the daily being presented, and or that she's talking about. This is the statement. And I say here, if we are to take the plain reading of the passage, there is a correct view of the daily, and the Millerites had been united upon that view. What we do not see is what is seen in the published account of this vision. Ellen White then says in the published account, then I saw in relation to the daily that the word sacrifice was supplied by man's wisdom and does not belong to the text. So this is added later when the vision is published. It's not written in when the vision is first written down, as far as we can tell. It's added. This expansion of the passage must have been made between the giving of the vision on October 23rd, 1850, and it being published some 2 weeks later. It could also be that manuscript 15, 1850, from which I take that other statement, is not the direct source for the November Present Truth article. Whatever the case, we do know that it is not the handwritten original and is a copy. This copy may simply contain a redacted version of that passage. So it is possible that it was originally in there and that in this copy that was taken out. So we don't know for certain. What we do know, though, is that in that manuscript 15, this sentence doesn't exist. But it does exist when it's published a couple of weeks later, and it does exist in early writings in every other place. We will address the implications of this in more detail. So I'm just noting that manuscript 15, the Present Truth article, and Experience and Views all have a statement in front of this: time has not been a test since 1844. They all have, I saw that God, the Lord showed me, I've also seen. Where in early writings, it just says time has not been a test since 1844, etc. So that's one point. And it's something that we have to understand in the context of this daily, because the New View proponents say that the issue of the daily that Ellen White is addressing here has to do with time setting. And actually, I don't find any evidence for that. So all these little details become extremely important to put together this picture of why this vision was given and how it's the way that it's put together in early writings, how that was misused by those that promote the New View. So again, this is kind of an involved argument. It requires a lot of close thinking to get through all this information, to get it into your head and to sort through it and to see it clearly. So this paper that I'm preparing here, I'm wanting people to read it. So I'm going to try to get it ready today and then email it out to everyone. I'm also going to put it on my academia site and then put the links on Facebook and other places. So people can find it if they want to find it. And it's I can't remember what the title is. It's something about the date for the writing of early writings, page 74. I keep changing the title. But anyway, you can find it on academia. It'll be the most recent paper there. So anyway, what we can note here, this next paragraph, is that Ellen White is addressing the truths to be made plain upon tables. And we saw this in our last presentation. Ellen White, in this vision of October 23rd, 1850, is outlining the truths that were on the 1843 chart that are going to still be on the 1850 chart, because she's been given this vision to make a new chart. And she outlines the additional truths that are going to be placed upon the chart. And that is something that I never saw before. Only this last week did I understand and see that clearly. And I don't think anyone else has ever noted that I can find. And that's because we mostly just know the statement from early writings, which is taken out of context. Now, Ellen White's putting that statement in early writings. It's also out of context when it's first published by James White in The Present Truth in November of 1850. That is, he doesn't include the first part of her vision that addresses all these different truths that need to be upon the chart. He only addresses the first part of the vision, which is, the Lord stretched out his hand a second time to recover the remnant of his people. And then he takes a couple of paragraphs from the latter part of her vision and puts them together. And then when it's republished in early writings, they even take another paragraph from a later vision and place it in there. So we've just never been allowed to see the context before. That's why we wouldn't have understood the statement. And that other people, whether they're opponents of the new view or even those that have been defending the old view, we haven't really taken the time to do this work of sorting through the documents. Now, Elder Jeff had done an initial work of it and found this, which is why I even knew that that was something we needed to look at. But I don't think he pieced it all together. He just took the position that these different I saws weren't addressing the same issue. And in that, he was correct. What I see is that more than that, Ellen White, with each of these I saws, was addressing the various points that needed to be on the 1850 chart. And that's the new idea, the new thing that we've seen. So as noted, the passage in early writings has the additional phrase about the word sacrifice being added by man's wisdom, this being added in its publication 2 weeks after the giving of the vision. In the context of the new chart to be made, this clarification supports the understanding of the daily being paganism, as this is one of the points often addressed in defense of this view. That is, when Ellen White puts this statement that the word sacrifice was added by man's wisdom, I found it hard for people to try to argue that this wasn't supporting the view that the daily was paganism, since it is one of the main points that is addressed in showing that the daily is not the sacrificial system of the Jews or anything like that, but that it's a counterfeit, which is paganism. Froome intimates, and others try to argue, that this comment is singling out the only point that was under agreement, and that there was no unity upon either the periods of 666 years or the 1335 days in relation to the daily in Daniel 8:11 to 13. So this idea that that Ellen White puts this statement here that talks about that the word sacrifice is added by man's wisdom, what they do is they try to argue, and I say Froome intimates and others try to argue. I mean, basically Froome argues this as well, that this is the only point that they were in agreement upon. So that they were in a disagreement regarding the daily, regarding the 666 years, regarding the 1335. They were in disagreement on these points, but they could all agree that the word sacrifice was added by man's wisdom. So Ellen White then is just noting the only point of agreement that they were all united upon. And this is a very clever tactic in trying to undermine what Ellen White's saying. But if you recognize that that statement is added later, even if it's a couple of weeks later to this vision, and you consider the whole context of what the vision was for, the publication of a new chart and the truths on it, it would actually make no sense to take Froome's position or the proponents of the new view's position. Now we're going to read a passage from Heidi Hikes as an example of this reasoning. He says, thus, the 1843 chart referred to in early writings, page 74, a chronological chart of the visions of Daniel and John, omitted the AD 33 cross, so that is, it doesn't mention AD 33 for the crucifixion, and the 66 years of the pagan Roman beast, so it doesn't mention the 666 years of the pagan Roman beast, and nowhere define the daily as paganism. The chart bore marks of careful revision to eliminate supposition and conjecture. Now, we discussed this before, but I want to go through this point by point. Such as had appeared in a half a dozen places on the earlier 1841 chart. So this chart, the 1841 chart, which chart is this? Does anybody know what that chart is?
I don't know that we've ever really gone through that or had it before us.
Okay, so, well, I think this is referring to the chart that we did go through on some of the Friday night study that had the Great Jubilee, the 2300 days, and the 2520. That's what I think it's referring to. Though I never knew that that chart was published in 1841. I always thought it was published earlier in 1842. And then from that, they made the 1843 chart. They used that, but he could be right that it's 1841. Now he says here, doubtful and disputed details were left out. Among them, the definition of the daily as pagan Rome. So this is a very clever paragraph in what he's doing. So what I say here, Hykes is being technically honest while being equally deceitful in regard to what is on the 1843 chart and what is not. The reasons given are pure imagination. He is correct that the 33 AD date, which Miller supposed was the year of the crucifixion, was not on the chart. We merely have the cross itself. And this is an important point, that the cross is there. And there's lots about the cross, where it's placed, the cross being what it has written on it and how it's connected to the text around it. I don't know if people have ever looked at the chart and read it, but it's going to quote from Daniel chapter 8, and where it says Prince of Princes on the crossbeam, whatever you call that on a cross. I call it the crossbeam, where Jesus' hands are nailed. That the word Prince of Princes is actually just the text itself going across the cross. So it's actually the quote from the verse. So they place that verse in a particular way so that the words Prince of Princes, that he shall stand up against the Prince of Princes ends up going across the crossbeam. So kind of interesting how they did that. But they don't have the date 33 AD where the cross is. Instead, they have the cross. Now, somebody can say, well, then, there was a dispute about this. Well, we don't have any evidence that there was a dispute about the date. So to say that the date was removed because there was some either disagreement or doubt, I think would be wrong. In 1842, there's no indication in the writings of the Millerites that there's some doubt as to in regard to the 33 AD date. So saying that it's taken off the chart because there was a disagreement is wrong. That wasn't until after that they started to look at the date 33 AD. We merely have the cross itself. However, since after the production of the chart, the Millerites came to recognize that there was no 0 year between 1 BC and 1 AD, this would have been an error on two accounts. So if they had put 33 AD on there, it would have been another mistake. There wouldn't have been just the one mistake. The first is that Jesus was crucified in 31 AD in the midst of the week, something first taught by Samuel Snow in 1844. The second is that the 33 AD date would mean that more than one error would have been seen in the figures on the chart. As they stand, the only mistake in the figures is seen in the top right-hand corner of the chart, which the Lord's hand obscured. Now, most people don't realize this because we think the date at the bottom is a mistake. It is the 1843 date at the bottom of the chart in error.
No.
Okay, why not? What is it that it's not? Why is it not an error at the bottom of the chart, but only at the top right-hand corner, even though it's the same date?
Because it's applying this to the 1335 that brings you to that time of blessing.
Okay, so when you look at the chart, there's these calculations, and right at the bottom of the chart in the center chronological column, it says 1798 plus 45 equals 1843. And that's, of course, mathematically correct. The 45 comes from the difference between the 1335 and the 1290. And then right to the right of the 1843 date on the bottom is another calculation that says 508 plus 1335 equals 1843. Again, this calculation is in relationship to the 1335. So in both those cases, the Jewish year 1843 is being marked, which ends on sunset at April 18th, 1844. So that isn't a mistake. One is, we know it's not affected in a certain way. It's not affected by the no zero year, correct? That is, and it's not even affected by what we might call the fullness of the year, because the 1290 and the 1335 don't go to BC dates. So they're not affected by that. However, when you go to the top right-hand corner where God held his hand over, it was the calculations of the 2520 and the 2300 days. So it was the 2520 minus 677 equals 1843. There you have a mistake because the math has a zero, but BC 677, or the AD and the BC dates, are ordinal counts. And so you would have to take that into account. So 677 subtractive from 2520 would be 1844. And the same with the 2300 days and 457. So the only mistake that Ellen White points out is that which God held his hand over, a mistake in some of the figures. But that wouldn't be at the bottom of the chart. So God's hand just covered that top right-hand corner, dealing with the 2520. Now, when his hand was removed, the mistake was seen. In a sense, God's hand has still always been over the top right-hand corner of the chart until this movement came along. That is, we started to recognize the 2520, that it wasn't an error, but also it helped us to fully understand the 2300 days and the calculations involved. So in some ways, when God's hand was removed and they saw their mistake, it wasn't removed completely until this present movement. Does that make sense to people? But I said a lot there.
It's actually well stated.
Okay. So when we go here, it says, when Hike speaks of them omitting the 666 years of the Roman beast, this is a reference to the 666 years from 158 BC to 508 AD. Since both dates are on the chart, with explanations that agree with Miller's view of the 666 years, it seems to be an overstatement on Hike's part. Is the calculation of 666 years explicitly shown? No. Is it implied? We would argue, yes. We also believe that Miller was correct in regard to the 666 years, but have shown other places that there are two more periods of 666 years that complement Miller's understanding. So again, he's technically correct in saying that the chart does not explicitly state that the daily is paganism, right? So he likes to be technically correct, but deceptive. It's kind of the work lawyers do, right? They can state facts, but they omit other facts. So really they're lying. And other people beside lawyers do this as well. Yeah, Dwight, you have a comment?
What you're saying is that he is selectively presenting the points that he wishes to be considered. He is creatively omitting others.
Right. So he's creating a false impression so that his narrative will be considered. But it appears on the surface that he's being correct and careful. And in order to notice his deception, you have to really understand. You can't just do a cursory reading. And that's why his book was so effective in deceiving people who once believed the old view to now accept the new view, because they accepted the statements he was making. They accepted them uncritically, and he has a way of doing it so that you put down your guard and you see it the way that he sees it. So, of course, this would be understood regarding the daily being paganism. There's no need to place this on the chart considering all the other items on the chart that are related to this understanding. The 1843 chart clearly says under the 508 date, taking away of the daily sacrifice, Daniel 12, verse 11 to 12. This could only be understood by those who made the chart as a reference to the daily being paganism that was taken away in 508. So to have to state that the daily is paganism, there's no need for it. Anybody looking at the chart who understands what 508 is would understand that that's the taking away of the daily, which is paganism. There would be no other reason for that 508 date. So if you're saying that there was if, as he argues, that doubted and disputed details would have been left out, then this statement would have been left out if it was truly a doubted and disputed detail. That is, they wouldn't have placed in there taking away the daily sacrifice, Daniel 12, verse 11 to 12. Right? So he can't have it both ways. He can't have it a doubted and a disputed detail that those things are going to be taken out when one of them that he claims is a doubted and disputed detail isn't taken out. He also confuses the issue by inferring that the Millerites believed the daily was pagan Rome. This is not the understanding of the Millerites. Now, we saw that Miller, at least in one of his writings, sort of seems to lean that way. But they understood that the daily was paganism, which included pagan Rome, and it was pagan Rome that was taken out of the way in 508. However, the Millerites, in their exposition of Daniel 8, marked the daily within the 2300 days as being a period of 965 years from 457 BC to 508 AD. This period of 965 years is still seen on the 1850 chart. So if they believed that the daily was just pagan Rome, they wouldn't have had the daily in 457 BC being this period from 457 BC to 508. So on the 1850 chart, it says the length of the daily in Daniel 8:13 from BC 457 to AD 508_9 equals 965 years. So the way that they're looking at it is they're just counting the length of the daily from 457, but that doesn't mean that they believe the daily began in 457. And why would that be? Could they possibly have argued that the daily began in 457?
I don't see that they believe that the daily began in 457. I just think that they're noting that this was a critical portion of that time period.
Right, yeah, because there's nothing that would mark the daily beginning there. Right? The paganism began in 457.
Right, there's nothing.
Yeah, so they wouldn't have been thinking that. But some people have argued that that's what they taught based upon the counting the 965 years. But we can see that the 965 years is merely looking at the 2300 days and counting which portion of it is paganism up to 508, then seeing that 30 years, and then having the from 508, they're going to have the papacy for 1260 years, or from 508 it's 1290, right? So they're going to have this period from 1290 from 508, and then 1260 from 538. So they're just marking that period of time in relation to Daniel 8, verse 13. How long shall be the daily? Well, unto 2,300 days. So they're going to start counting from 457. But they already know that the daily began, or paganism began, long before that. Now there's even, and also the pagan desolation didn't begin in 457 at the point where they're, they established Jerusalem again, that they, under Artaxerxes' decree. They're not going to use that to mark, well, that's when the daily desolation began. I mean, they wouldn't mark that then. They would have to mark it back at least to Babylon, right? So there's the problem that you have with some of these arguments. Now, so Dwight gave me some papers here, which I'm going to have to dig up. I know I downloaded them. So Dwight, when you were looking at this issue, what was it you were specifically looking for?
Well, when one of the papers that I sent to you had to deal with Froome's comment from the footnote that you were using.
Okay, right. So I had used a footnote, and can you kind of explain what that
Sure.
was about?
Okay. Leroy Froome wrote a series called The Prophetic Faith of Our Fathers.
Yeah.
Now, the footnote itself is not carefully written for one that is acclaimed as being such a great scholar.
Okay.
Now, the reason that I'm stating this, when you take a look at the 1850 chart and you compare the way that Froome has written his comment, there are some glaring differences that to me just jumped right off the page.
Okay, and so I brought it up here. I brought up his statement and what's on the 1850 chart.
Okay. As you go through this, Froome writes, the third column begins the 2300 years in the time of the Persian ram, followed by the Grecian goat, with the exceeding great horn that developed as Rome in its pagan and papal phases. Then followed the seven-headed great red dragon of Revelation 12, pagan Rome, and the 10-horned beast from the sea, papal Rome. Now, if you read the scripture without reading Froome's statement, you would immediately pick off that Froome, or that the Bible has this in a very different way. Froome is trying to make it so that you're thinking that the dragon and the 10-horned beast are both in Revelation 12, which they are not.
Mm-hmm.
One is Revelation 12, and then the following chapter, Revelation 13, brings forth the other.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it says further in Froome's comment, but the two-horned beast from the earth is here called image of papacy. Now, image of papacy is identifying that Froome is looking at the 1850 chart, because that does not appear anywhere on the 1843 chart.
Right. So, yeah, so this, because he's talking here about the 1850 chart, as you're saying, right?
Right, correct.
Yeah, and so he's looking at, and I'm looking at the 1850 chart right now, and it does have pagan Rome, papal Rome, then image of papacy. But yeah, he doesn't mention that these are from Revelation 13.
Okay, now as he continued, its two horns, originally designated as Papist and Protestant, are revised to Republicanism and Protestantism.
Yeah.
Now, it was intriguing to me because when I did a search, the only one of the early Adventist authors that used the term Papist and Protestant was J.N. Andrews.
And he's after.
Right. We're talking 18, in 54. The 1854s.
Yeah.
So here again, this is poor scholarship. It's poor referencing. He's twisting the words of what's going on. The term, as he's trying to say, was revised to Republicanism and Protestantism. But if we look carefully at the writing of the pioneers, we're going to find that this term has been used much longer than what we find papist and Protestant.
Right. So, yeah, so it becomes a little bit of a problem here. Now, we know that there's the charts amended,
Okay.
right? So we can see that there's white out there and that Republican and Protestantism has been put in. But he makes the claim that papist and Protestant were there, but he doesn't give us any basis to know that he's correct. How he would know this, because you couldn't tell this by examining the chart, at least not in his day. Maybe we could use x-rays and find that out, but there would be no indication what was written underneath.
Well, if this was something that was to have been incredibly relevant to his point,
Yeah.
we should have seen something at least from James White, if not from both James and Ellen White, regarding this situation. But we don't.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing that Father Miller wrote that used these terms papist and Protestant. There is nothing that was written by either of the Whites or by any of the Millerite expositors.
Mm-hmm.
It's not until Andrews comes up in 1854 that the term itself is even used, and that's 100 years before Froome even writes this portion of his series.
Yeah. So we don't know what was written there.
Correct.
It could have said church and state.
Yes, agreed.
Or churchcraft and statecraft or something like that. The idea that it was church and state, I think, was understood, because Republican and Protestantism is just an expression of being church and state.
I would agree.
So,
yeah. But when he finishes this portion where he says the 666, however, is still curiously represented as connected with the second beast, with reference to the enforcement of its mark, which is not here explicitly defined.
yeah.
Well, Miller was being very specific that the 666 was related to paganism and then to papalism.
Yeah. And it's something that connects paganism and papalism.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. Which is what I've shown, is that it connected Babylon and Rome using Ezekiel's prophecy and the 666 years that results from that. And also that there was another period of 666 years from 129 BC to 538 BC. So I see that there's 3 periods of 666 years, and that all fits in and supports what Miller is saying. But yeah, so, I mean, I've never been comfortable with the papist and Protestant being underneath Republican and Protestantism, because one of the problems is when you read the passage. So if you go up just above that, it says the 2 lamb-like horns, Republican and Protestantism, whose names number 666, become united in action, speak like a dragon, and control the civil legislature, and cause it to make the church the image of the papacy, which received a deadly wound and was healed. Now, it's pretty clear that it actually says to make themselves the image of the papacy. So that wouldn't make sense if it was papist and Protestant.
Right.
So there would be an illogic. It just wouldn't make sense to say that they put papist and Protestant. If you put church and state, the 2 lamb-like horns, church and state, whose name's number 666, that I don't know what that would mean either necessarily, because whose name's number 666, the way that people have taken this is that they were waiting for 666 churches, Protestant churches. Once there were 666 of them, then sort of Jesus would come back or something like that. And so So whether that was one interpretation someone had, or whether that was the main interpretation that they had at that time, that would have to be considered. But we could take whose name's number 666. Now, maybe it said something else, churches and governments, or, but it wouldn't make sense, Papist and Protestant, whose name's number 666 either.
Well,
So it just doesn't, there must be something underneath there that maybe we haven't considered what was originally there. And I tried to figure it out reading the early Millerite writings, or not, or the Adventist writings after 1844. And there doesn't seem to be any real connection until we get Jan Andrews, who clearly marks this out, that it's republicanism and Protestantism.
well, James White does a good job marking it out as well,
Yeah.
because in the Advent Review and Sabbath Herald, 5th of August of 1851,
Okay. So that's,
he gives the comment, "Are we not perfectly safe in regarding the two-horned beast as the symbol of a civil and religious power, differing in some respects from the one that preceded it? Will not our better judgment decide at once that the location of this power is in America, and that the civil power of one horn is the government of the republic, and the religious power of the other horn Protestantism?"
so wouldn't it be civil and religious? Civil and religious power maybe was written there.
That's possible. Finishing his statement, "and that republicanism and Protestantism united to make itself an image to the seven-headed beast, and thus become united." Thus the text in Revelation 17:11 is explained as follows. Now, James White had a clear understanding.
Mhm.
He had a very direct understanding, because he is looking at this two-horned beast as a symbol of a religious and a civil power. What Froome is doing would seem to be twisting history, because he wants not to have a clear explanation of these figures. He wants the reader to agree with him.
Mhm. And he may have added this Papist Protestant thing just as a guess.
Correct.
Yeah, with no evidence.
Exactly.
Mhm. Okay. Now, getting back to, because this is the account of the vision from manuscript 15, October 23rd, 1850. And, as we said, that Ellen White is marking out the truths that were on the 1843 chart that are still valid, and the new truths that are going to also be added onto the 1850 chart. So she's looking at the old chart, not to deal with some issue or problem, which is what the new view states, is that she's basically addressing this issue or problem of time setting in connection, something to do with the daily. But once you really understand this vision, you can see that that's not what's happening. So when she says, "I saw the two-horned beast had a dragon mouth, and that his power was in his head, and that the decree would go out of his mouth, then I saw the mother of harlots, that the mother was not the daughters, but separate and distinct from them. She has had her day." And so if it was Papist and Protestant, would that be contradicting what Ellen White's saying here in 1850, before the 1850 chart is made? You understand what I'm saying? Because when she says the mother of harlots, and that the mother was not the daughters, and separate and distinct, you're not going to have the mother, the Papist, be part of this two-horned beast.
Right.
It has a dragon's mouth, right? But the mother is not the daughters.
It's a separate figure altogether.
Right. That's what she's saying. So she's talking about the two-horned beast here and saying that it doesn't represent papist. Now this would be a correction of Miller made before the 1850 chart was made. And this error would not then have ended up on the 1850 chart to later be amended.
No, I can see that.
Yeah. So his idea that it said papist and Protestant would make no sense because Ellen White's giving a vision what's supposed to be on the chart. And if they did put papist and Protestant, they would have actually disregarded what she says in this paragraph. So she says it's but separate and distinct from them. She has had her day and it is past, and her daughters, Protestant sects, were next to come on stage and act out the same mind that the mother had when she persecuted the saints. I saw that as the mother had been declining in power, the daughters have been growing, and soon they will exercise the power once manifested by the mother. So the mother can't be represented in the two-horned beast. So it can't be papist and Protestant.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, the rest of the issue that I was having with this, when I looked at Miller's examination of history, and that's ESH 24.1 and 24.2. He was focused very much on the figure that Daniel had seen of Nebuchadnezzar's figure. So when Miller was going through this, his comments were focused more, I would have to say, on the first and second angel's message rather than having a clear focus on the third.
Right. So he didn't have a clear, definitely did not understand the issues of the Sabbath and Sunday for one.
Correct. So here's what he wrote. The history of the fourth kingdom, which we are now entering upon, is divided into two parts, represented by the legs and the feet of the image, the 10 horns and the little horn, the great red dragon and the woman, the pagan and papal, the daily sacrifice abomination, and the abomination which maketh desolate. So Miller was dividing the legs of the figure into the daily and the abomination which maketh desolate.
Yeah, the two desolating powers.
So he was not being focused on this, as Froome was trying to say, the papist and Protestant. He was focused that this was Rome in two different forms.
Yeah.
So when it comes for the 1850 chart, where they had to make this greater addition, they're coming out with this lamb-like beast with two horns that eventually begins to speak like a dragon. It's a completely separate creature from what has gone on before.
And they would have known this when they made the 1850 chart. They wouldn't put papist and Protestant as the two horns.
Exactly.
So we don't know what was originally underneath republicanism and Protestantism.
But in this situation, for the purpose of this discussion, what we're determining is that Froome is trying to lead us down a rabbit hole. He is twisting what's going on because we know, number one, that the 1843 chart was directed by the hand of the Lord.
Yeah.
And should not be changed except by inspiration. Right? Now, with that in mind, we then come to the 1850 chart. It was directed by inspiration, right?
Yeah.
Now, I don't see that the same can be said about the 1863 chart.
No, it can't be, even though it is in God's providence what's on there.
Right.
And, you know, one is particularly that the 2520 is represented unwittingly, as well as the 2,604 years of the prophetic mirror.
Right.
But yeah, we don't get from Ellen White anything about the 1863 chart other than that it exists and that it's going to be a good chart to do evangelism with.
Correct.
But she isn't in any way even implying that the 1863 chart corrects or replaces the 1843 or the 1850 chart.
So if these two charts have been directed by inspiration,
Mhm.
then what is on the charts are meant for our edification. That Froome's attempted distraction is nothing more than an attempt to have those that wish to question join with him, but those that wish to accept that this is of God can become more strengthened in what he is trying to tell us.
Mhm.
And I don't see that we're questioning the chart, we're questioning Froome.
Yes. And I can see now that he was being deceptive, which I didn't, I just sort of took what he said before at face value.
I understand.
Yeah. Now, going through this then here, I just want to go through this because we kind of did this last time. But, God had stretched out his hand a second time to recover the remnant of his people. So this is the vision, how it begins. Now,
Right.
in early writings, it says September 23rd, I saw that the Lord had stretched out his hand a second time. Well, that isn't at the beginning of this vision, that it's in manuscript 15. That date is not written there on this manuscript in that way. At least from what we have from the E.G. White Estates. They just tell us that it's October 23rd. So there's little details that we don't know. But anyway, one of the things about this is that we see about the rubbish, right? The efforts to spread the truth should now be made, such as were put forth in 83 and 8 or 43 and 44. And then we're in this gathering time. The scattering time, we can't look at what happened then because it didn't have any effect. But now this same work is going to have an effect, the designed effect, she says. And we need to be zealous and united in this work, which is one of the things that you really were pointing out yesterday in your presentation.
Right.
And that we have till December 25th, 2021 to become united in the work that we're doing. That was your suggestion based upon Ezra chapter 10.
Exactly.
20th day of the 9th month. So these are not in the the early writings, 1882 publication, and they're not in the present truth either. They're taking out these statements about the rubbish and so forth. So when it was published, these weren't put in there, but they give us some information because we can see that Ellen White is talking about basically a cleaning up of these truths to present them on a new chart. So she talks about a paper was needed, right? That's the next paragraph. And I saw that the burden of the paper was laid on James and that it was important to publish the truth as to preach it. I saw that James should not be discouraged because of lack of interest, etc. And then she says, I saw the truth should be made plain upon tables. Now, when she's writing this, we don't have, of course, the 1850 chart yet. So when she says, I saw the old chart was directed by the Lord, she's talking then in the context of this new chart. And then she says that the necessary means should not be spared to make it plain. So we need to take our means, our finances, and we're not gonna spare those. We're gonna use them to make this chart. And so when she refers to the old chart, that not a peg of it should be altered without inspiration, she's making a call that when we make this 1850 chart, we're going to keep all the pegs that were on the 1843 chart.
Right.
That the figures on the chart were as God wanted them. So we're going to have those figures on this new chart. Now his hand was over and hid a mistake in some of the figures so that none could see it until his hand was removed. We know about the mistake, so that will be corrected on the 1850 chart because it's corrected by inspiration, not Ellen White's inspiration. It was corrected during the Millerite time period by inspiration.
And as we have addressed multiple times in the past, this is a mistake. It is singular. It is not multiple. So there's a mistake that is on this chart.
Right.
And I have a incredulous attitude as to why so many that wish to detract from what has been on the 1843 chart wish to apply this in multiple ways.
Yeah, they just says she says it's full of mistakes, which she doesn't say.
Right.
And she's actually very particular about what she says.
She's a very careful writer, but in this situation, James was also her editor, and he was an amazing editor.
Mm-hmm. So here it says the suggestion is that she is saying that the truths on the old chart should not be changed when they are placed on the new chart. This especially relates to the figures, the numbers, the calculations, etc., that express the time prophecies on the charts. Each of these are also on the 1850 chart, but with the correction of the singular mistake. This alteration is by inspiration. This inspiration is not Ellen White in this case, but the light that came from God's word in 1843 and 1844. It is not, as some assert, providing permission to correct anything we see as error on the chart merely because we think our Bible study supports different conclusions. Right, and then she's going to have the section dealing with the Sunday law, right? So this new light on the Sunday law is going to be addressed. And on the 1850 chart, that's why I put this paragraph or sentence here, that Froome tries to then correct, or tries to, I wouldn't say correct, he's intending to obfuscate the truth of what it's actually saying. So we just have Froome's conjecture, and there's really no support of that. It would be contrary to what they believe, the right papist and Protestant on there. Now, the next section of that vision deals with Christ's ministry in the heavenly sanctuary. Is that on the 1850 chart? Well, we can clearly see that it is. We're going to have the holy and the most holy place. And it's even going to talk about here, I saw that there was a cherub sitting on either end of the mercy seat with their wings spread over the ark. And there also were two angels, one on either end of the ark with their wings spread out on high and touching each other, while their other wings reached to each side of the apartment. And that representation is on the chart as well. So you have the holy and the most holy place, and the laver, and the altar of burnt offering. So you have the sanctuary truth represented on the chart, with the explanations, the commencement of the ministration of Christ in the most holy, explanation of the sanctuary, the ark, the two small cherubims, etc., are all written on the 1850 chart. So again, you can see everything that she says in this vision is addressing the 1850 chart. What should be on it? What should be on it that was on the 1843 chart, and what new truths will be added to it? And this to me is an amazing revelation, because it's something that we never knew, and becomes quite clear by examination of this problem. Now, so the correct view of the daily here, we already addressed with Hike's comment. Now, just to address Sister Minor a little bit here, So the way that the New View proponents look at this is they look at the statement regarding the daily and then time setting and this plan to raise funds to go to Jerusalem as all connected. So they try to weave this story that there was some new application of the daily in relation to time that was being used to promote a new date, and that these people also were planning to go to Jerusalem. So they tie up Sister Minor in this issue. Now, really, it's quite a confusion. We're going to look at this actually in much more detail as we go through this week. We're going to look specifically at what Crozier was teaching regarding the daily. We're going to learn about the age to come movement and what that is. We're going to look more closely at Sister Minor and what she was teaching. And it's going to be a bit of work. And some of this is going to end up in this paper that I'm doing, not in this section, but in the second section. I'm going to expand on it much more. And that's why we have to delve into it. One of the reasons, I guess. But the main point here, just dealing with the publication of this new chart, we now have an explanation of why she is mentioning Sister Minor. Because she's already mentioned that no means should be spared in publishing this new chart. And it's going to cost them quite a bit of money. It's a new technology. It's not cheap to make these charts. And here's what she then says. I had a view of Sister Minor and others with her, that their visions were not true and that God had not spoken by them. I saw that if we are to go to Jerusalem, then the truth should not be made plain upon tables. So what is Ellen White saying here? In the context, she's just had a vision that the truth should be made plain upon tables. If we are to go to Jerusalem, then the truth should not be made plain upon tables, for our minds should be turned towards Jerusalem, and our means should be reserved to get the saints to Jerusalem. So why is this error? Why is she pointing out this error?
She's giving an either or choice.
Right. God is giving us this message, the truth should be made plain upon tables. And if you're going to start taking funds and directing them to get people to Jerusalem, then those funds are not going to be available to do the work that God has told us to do.
Okay, so in other words, we have the same either or in the third angel's message.
Yeah. But I just think now, because of this, what we've discovered last week, we finally have an explanation why this is here. Why this paragraph is here. Somebody else has a comment? Is there somebody else? Maybe it's Dwight. Okay, so Dwight agrees with there. Now she says, I saw that the faults and errors of Sister Minor and those with her in past time had not been confessed. This is the reason why they have been left to run into great errors. I saw that Brother Bates must be careful and be willing to receive light that comes in other ways besides through visions. I saw that he was too slow to receive light from his brethren. So Brother Bates is caught up in the visions also of Sister Minor to some degree. That's the way that I understand this. And Ellen White's saying that Brother Bates needs to study more, right? And receive light from his brethren, not just from visions. So this counsel he appears to have followed. But here in this time, we have this paragraph introduced. And also Ellen White, one of the things that she's addressing, both in the publication of The Present Truth, which becomes Review and Herald, and also in the publication of the chart, is to address a lot of these errors. And if they were to go to Old Jerusalem and people are going to take their funds and put them in this direction, the work of God would have been thwarted. But also it presents that there are people who have faults and errors and are unwilling to confess them. And this is an important point that we have at the present time. Now, I believe that at this time it's conspiracy theories. I believe that conspiracy theories have served the same purpose and come from the same spirit as the Gorgas incident. That they've never been a part of this message. And yet people want to continue to introduce these conspiracy theories. And Dwight presented some strong statements on that yesterday, because we have a work to do, and these conspiracy theories detract from that work in the same way that this idea of going to Jerusalem detracted from the work that was put before the Millerites in 1850.
When we look at the situation of what Mrs. White gave as a warning about going to Jerusalem, and the fact that it was going to be a very long, hard process, even to get a few to understand.
Mm-hmm.
Yet we compare this with the effects that are still being found by these two tables over 150 years later.
Mm-hmm.
The money was better spent in putting out these charts, in providing these tables, because people are to this day being edified by them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what Sister Minor kept promoting was something that has largely been has largely passed into history.
Mm-hmm.
We have a few documents that tell us this was happening,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't have much to study from it because this was not of God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's actually really hard to dig up some of this information. What really was going on with time setting that she's talking about, because here in 1850 there doesn't appear to be, when she talks about time, and that there's never going to be a message on definite time, or whatever she says, how she words it, never have a message based on time. It's not until 1851 that you have this time setting, and that paragraph that's in early writings comes from June of 1851, from an article that's published on July 21st, 1851. And I'm going to bring out in the paper quite clearly the significance of that date, because July 21st, 1851 is exactly 7 years to the day from when Samuel Snow gave the midnight cry at Boston. And that has to be significant. So one is it being the number 7, but it tells us a bunch of other things, which I'm not going to go into now, because we also know that this vision 6 years to the day from when Hiram Edson had his vision in the cornfield. So there's something about how God is repeating Millerite history, even in early Adventist history. And it says something about how it's then connected to our history, because we're now going back and finding these connections at the present time. So there's going to be a lot to look at in this connection. So we're going to try to flesh some of these things out a little bit more. We're going to look at Jane Andrews' article. So and James White's, things that you've already quoted from. And I'm going to see how much time I have to get all of this together. But I want to clearly show what the Millerites believed and what the Adventists believed about the two-horned beast and about 666, and how that has been distorted and misrepresented so that it's clouded the issue on the daily. I mean, it becomes so clear now what Ellen White is talking about that you could not get it to be supporting the view that the proponents of the new view of the daily have. And it's clearly supporting that the daily is paganism. That's what they were united upon, not just that the word sacrifice didn't belong to the text. And that she's talking about the 1850 chart, and the 1850 chart. Does the 1850 chart clearly acknowledge the daily and that the daily is paganism?
I would say that it does.
Yes. And so we're going to look at that as well. And so if you're going to argue that Ellen White isn't supporting the view that the daily is paganism, then why is it on the 1850 chart? Now, he's going to argue that it's not, right? That's what Froome is going to argue, and other people argue that it's not there. But we're going to see that it is. So anyway, we're going to close with prayer. And any final comments?
Not at this point.
Thank you for your work.
Okay, you're welcome. Now Angela made a comment, says, guess you've noticed the monster marked image of papacy on the 50 chart is captioned Protestantism on the 63 chart, and that the beasts are chiastic reversed in the left columns. So on the 1863 chart, there are some differences. The beasts look the same, but are reversed, which I think is significant. I've actually did a video on the 1863 chart, on the 43, the 50, and the 63 chart. And one of my resources was an article called The Three Clocks, I believe, that somebody had put out, which really notes these differences. But they also make the same argument that I do, that the 1863 chart is not, it's not a rejection, at least in the way that it's done, of the truths on the 40 and 53 chart as we tried to make it. It is the image of jealousy, but God in his providence has details on that chart, and also in the book that was attached to it, that Joseph Bates, when he talks about the 1863 chart, he says there's a prophecy of this chart in the Bible. Does anybody know what he was referring to? So just because this is a good point here. So when he says there's a prophecy of this chart in the Bible,
So Bates is saying that there's a prophecy of the 1863 chart in the Bible.
yeah,
Interesting.
yeah. And what he says, he quotes Isaiah chapter 30. So we're going to look at this just to close this study, which I think is quite interesting. It's under a subtitle, A Rebellious People. Now go, write it before them in a table and note it in a book. So the 1863 chart doesn't speak, right? It has no real words on it. It doesn't have any text, just other than headings. So they have a book, the key to the 1863 chart, or the prophetic key. And so Bates, when writing to James White, he writes about this. He quotes this verse. Now go write it before them in a table and note it in a book, that it may be for the time to come forever and ever, that this is a rebellious people, lying children that will not hear the law of the Lord, which say to the seers, see not, and to the prophets, prophesy not unto us right things, speak unto us smooth things, prophesy deceits. Does this apply to the 1863 chart?
I think that is so very blunt that you couldn't deny that it applies to this.
Yeah, and it's funny, not really funny, but James White's reaction is he knows what Joseph Bates is getting at, but he just kind of dismisses it. Well, you know, I think his interpretation is apocryphal, is what James White says.
Okay, but the beginning of the chapter
Yeah.
in saying, do not go down into Egypt,
Mm-hmm.
is this also a warning that we should not accept the other views that were being promulgated from the other churches?
Right. And this is
Now,
what happens. Yeah.
the question I will leave this with you, approximately when would you say that Isaiah 30 was written?
Well, Isaiah 30 is written after the fall of Samaria, I believe. Trying to think if this part is written after the fall of Samaria.
Well, you might consider that. I mean, I know,
I'm trying
you
to
know,
remember.
I know what Usher would think, but
What does Usher say?
713.
Okay. So 713 is after the fall of Samaria. Yeah. So he's correct about that time. Probably it would be around there. Yeah. Okay. So that's correct. Whether he's got it to the exact year or not, I don't know.
All right.
But the thing about it here is that get you out of the way, turn aside from the path, cause the Holy One of Israel to cease from before us. That's what they're saying when God is making this table and this book. So I think that the 1863 chart stands as a testimony, in spite of themselves, against the direction that they're going.
Okay.
That God, it wasn't their plan to have the 2520 and the 2,604 years represented on the chart, right? It wasn't their plan to give the starting date for the 2520 for Judah in the book. So it still says 677, which to me is an odd thing that people say, well, they rejected the 2520, but the 677 is still in the book, right? So in spite of their attempts to say to the prophets, prophesy not, and to the seer, see not, speak unto us smooth things and prophesy deceits, get ye out of the way, turn away from the path, cause the Holy One of Israel to cease from before us. God still is giving a message through that chart that has confirmed our understanding of the 2520 and other truths. So I think there's something there that we often miss.
Okay.
But it is an image of jealousy as well.
All right.
The rebuilding of Jericho.
So what the way that you're approaching this, if this is correct at 713,
Yeah.
then that is 36 years before Manasseh is taken captive, right?
Yeah.
36 is a mirror reverse of 63. And 63 is a factor of 2520, right?
Okay. Yeah. And see, I might not put 713. I mean, Usher's giving his dates. I'd have to look at specifically why he's marking it at 713, because his dates can be off by a year.
Well, I'm just trying to give you.
Yeah, I don't know about your math though either. So 713 is.
You have 23 years added to 677 to make 700, right?
Yeah, but you're just doing, you're taking 677 minus 713. You're going to get 36.
Right.
But okay, so I see. Okay, I see what you're saying. So you're taking the 23. Okay, so you got the 36 to Manasseh. And you're saying that 36, then we would just reverse it. It's a symbol of 63. But I would even just say as 36, it's a good symbol.
Right.
Because we have the 36 from 34 AD to 70 AD. So So there's something about it here. But also you're saying 63, 63, if you reverse it, that becomes 1863 as a mirror.
Or it becomes 63, which was a factor of the 2520.
Yeah. But I would also connect it to the mirror, to the year 1863.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. But whether it is 713, I would have to dig into why he gives that particular date. His dates in Isaiah seem to be pretty good, because he has 742 for the first year of Ahaz. And so it's in other places that he gets more a year off. So this might be actually quite accurate.
Okay.
But anyway, thanks for that little bit at the end. Let's close with prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are so thankful for this day and for the things that you show us. I pray that you can be with each person, encourage them, help us in our study to continue to understand your word and to grow in our characters. And also, Lord, for this movement, we pray that we can become united upon the message that you want us to give, that as individuals, we can set aside our own will and desires, and that we can take up the work that is your will and your desire. Be with us now, be with us in the afternoon in the study with Odilio, and we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.